All right, welcome to CCTV, where we're joined by Mariko Davidson, candidate for Cambridge City Council, Jan Devereux, candidate for Cambridge City Council, and Nadeem Mazen. I am myself a Cambridge City Councilor and excited to have you all with us today. We are just going to do a TV half-hour riff on what's new and hot in the Cambridge City Council
unscripted
elections. Unscripted, unedited, raw, and uncut. We're not going to, I think, have any dial-in phone calls for the live show today, but you will get an earful from the three of us who are all up for election this Tuesday, November 3rd, which is 9 days, a week from this Tuesday.
But who's counting?
I am. And in many ways, the three of us and many others are actually working together for the first time, or at least for the first time in a long time. So maybe you guys can say something about what this city council term has been like for you two and what the cooperation has felt like.
I think it's been great. I think it's just about exactly a year ago that you and I had coffee and you said, hey, how about running for city council? And I think at that point I was like, oh, really? City council? Wow, I don't know, And so a lot has happened in a year. I'm pretty pleased to be where I am doing this and to have such great other people have jumped in. I mean, it's going to be really daunting. We have 23 names on the ballot, so that's a lot for the voters to figure out. But I think the quality of the challengers is really high, and I'm pleased about that. Yeah. What about you, Mariko?
Likewise. I mean, it was a little under a year ago, but actually I had coffee with Nadeem as well.
Having a lot of coffee these days, community organizing.
Where did you have coffee?
And yeah, having coffee as well, and thinking about the idea of running for city council as a community organizer, as an activist, and I thought about it for a long time and really threw my hat into the ring this summer. But like you, Jan, the quality of the candidates right now on the ballot is really high. I think we have, what's really fun is that we actually are collaborating. Yeah. We've all written op-eds together. We've all collaborated in other ways together. Nadeem and I are on the same slate together. You and
we like each other's Facebook posts.
We like each other's Facebook posts.
We tweet to each other.
Yeah.
So historically, slates, formally organized slates, had been issue based. Really, for or against rent control was kind of the way it had been for a while. And when rent control was outlawed on a state level, it seems like slates disappeared for a little while. Yeah. Last council term, I think people were very shocked and surprised to see Dennis and Carlone and I slate together, but also win together. Yeah, and we ran with the third candidate, Janicki House, who espoused many of the same values, and it was also a great organizer. So to see 2 of 3 get in was, I think, really inspiring for a lot of people who didn't feel like they could get a foothold in this city, in this city that had largely been about sprawling developments and lack of contextual planning to many. It seemed like that to many. And I think from the inside I can say there's definitely planning, there's definitely good intentions on the part of the city administrators, and there's largely pretty good intentions amongst the councilors, but it's not that next level of planning that I think many are hoping for. It's not what Cambridge is capable of, and certainly there is a predisposition for anyone who's in elected office to say, we did great, re-elect us, rather than, oh my goodness, we could be doing so much better.
Yeah.
So, what could we be doing better?
Well, implementing the plans, for starters. I mean, it's not as though we haven't done any planning, but the question is when the rubber hits the road, do we have the political will to stick with it and see it through? And we've seen that happen in the Alewife area, so that I hope that with this next round of planning that's coming up soon, you guys are going to have a roundtable discussion tomorrow night to talk about that we won't lose our nerve, that we'll be able to say, we've got some great plans, but we really need to make it happen, and we need to hold developers' feet to the fire a little more to make sure that we're getting the infrastructure and the community benefits that we were promised. Otherwise, it's all just a big mess.
Well, my inside the council look at holding developers' feet to the fire is that I'm astonished at the things that are approved on the council floor in like a 7-2 vote often, where Councilor Carlone and I will be the sole objecting voices, and somehow this is painted as us not cooperating, but really, well, you have to realize the subtext here is these developers are coming in, and before we've even begun to negotiate for community benefit, 7 out of the 9 say, I'm happy to give you a yes vote. I've already gotten what I want for community benefit. Right. And when we negotiate one-on-one, getting what we want isn't the name of the game. Each of us could get what we want, but we're much more powerful when we negotiate as a team. If the developer already knows that the project is going to pass, they offer little. But if they think it's not going to pass, or if they know it's not going to pass, they really have to negotiate. And we have never, almost never, forced a developer to that type of reconsideration and that type of higher level community benefit. The only example I can think of where the council really did say this is not good enough was the Volpe site. And in fact, it was so abysmal that they had taken our expectations and not just not exceeded them. They were actually lower in what they were offering than many of the developments that did pass this year.
Yeah, so that's going to be a big, I mean, we've got a lot of plans to put into place. We've got net zero. We've got the climate change vulnerability study that needs to be put into a plan and then in some way executed. We've got a master plan. We've got a new bike master plan, which is really exciting. I went to that hearing last week, and it looks great on paper, but, you know, are we going to have skirmishes on every street like we did on Pearl Street, you know? And I went to the Western Avenue celebration yesterday. Wonderful to see everybody there, but I saw, you know, some counselors there who hadn't seemed that enthusiastic about it, you know, when people started to complain about, well, you know, the street's a little narrower in one place and traffic is worse.
Right.
But, you know, that path is amazing.
It really is.
It is beautiful. And the park, Cronin Park, I mean...
What's it like as a full-time biker going down a protected bike route? You want to talk a little bit about our bike hopes for the years to come?
I mean, we all know that biking with cars blended together is scary. I mean, the data shows it. People don't bike, especially when the weather gets bad, because it's terrifying.
To be in traffic.
And women don't bike.
And women don't bike.
Yeah.
I just happen to bike year-round because I'm a really impatient commuter. So I freeze and I just deal with it. But if if you're normal, then you probably aren't going to go through that kind of pain. But once you start separating people from automobiles, then you get a lot more cyclists.
A lot more people onto it, and then traffic
kids.
is less,
and
right?
it's much safer. The traffic is safer for people who drive, but also much safer for people who walk. And so there's a lot of people who walk who are saying, let's not talk about bike infrastructure. What about us?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to recognize that as people who bike and people who walk, that we really want to see bikers have an increase in compliance and enforcement, so that people who bike are doing the right thing, but that compliance will actually increase when their infrastructure becomes safer as well.
Exactly.
I mean, I'd love to see parents feel comfortable letting their smaller children ride to school, because then, you know, they know that the infrastructure is in place and that the likelihood that their, you know, child will get hurt on the way to school is so low that it doesn't make sense to not let them bike. Mm-hmm. And I think that we do have the opportunity to create that kind of infrastructure here. And the other thing is that at the end of the day, you know, we really do still build cities for cars in a lot of way. Like during the wintertime, we plow streets, but we don't plow sidewalks. If you had it's still part of the public domain in many cases. And if you had a cart, if you had a wheelchair, if you had a baby stroller, if you were out of luck last winter. And so that's just another way of highlighting how we prioritize automobiles rather than people in our city. And it's an equity issue, as we've all kind of highlighted.
Now, I just want to talk about a couple of totally disconnected things.
Sure.
First, I want to talk about your civics work. I also want to talk about your civics work, and in particular, I've been fielding all these questions about what our plans for snow removal are. So I want to hear a little bit. I'll just give you a heads up.
I'm going to do it all.
So first, civics. You're the managing director of the Engagement Lab, which is like the region's premier civics and technology experimentation laboratory? Yeah, we are where new media, play, research, and civic engagement all mix. We're at the intersect of And that's at Emerson.
That's at Emerson. We're an applied research lab. We do projects locally and globally. We just started a new consortium with a bunch of universities here called Boston Civic Media, but we also do projects all across the world. I was in Cairo last month working with the United Nations Development Program.
My people.
With your people, with your cousin, actually.
Yeah, she's my cousin.
Cool. Yeah, and one of the things that we did there was a design thinking workshop, and one of the products that came out of it was created for Egyptians by Egyptians, and it was a card game that started the difficult conversation around violence against women prevention, and it was so that community organizers could go into their community and start having these conversations. And so we facilitated this design thinking workshop where we taught people to then be able to teach that workshop to have a multiplier effect.
Training the trainers.
Yeah, training the trainers, and we don't know what will come out of it, but a card game like that was really inspiring, and we have yet to see what else will come out of it. So we do everything from
what do you have in mind for Cambridge?
I was going to say, can we have a card game to plan?
We could.
Housing policy, for instance.
We could.
Or more than a card game. What else are you working on?
Yeah. So we have something called Community Planet, which is really exciting, where you get an online avatar and you create. It's a little cartoon figure, and it has a long-term conversation about what community issues are happening in your city, and you can begin to, it's a way to collect qualitative data around participatory planning. So there's opportunities there. There is this opportunity of creating more games and play. Maybe we could use Legos like I did with Mayor Menino's administration, and pull some of that kind of civic engagement out there. There's also MIT's lab, Changing Places, I think they're called, and they do a lot of Lego work there. Maybe we could bring them into the fold and use some play and some analysis.
And Cambridge Redevelopment Authority, I think, used Legos to great effect when they were doing the Foundry, some of the planning. It's like, how would you lay out the floor plan, and how high would you go on which floors? And I at first I thought, Legos, come on. And I looked at it, and people were really engaging with their Foundry building.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we need to do some Legos for the Volpe Center.
Maybe we need to get the GSA and the government to play with Legos a little bit and tell us what they have.
I think I would love to see that. Yeah.
So there's
issue Legos.
Government issue Legos 10 times the cost and half as good.
That's right.
Okay.
Only in one color.
Sort of olive green, maybe.
What about your civic work? You started the Fresh Pond Residents Alliance, 2 years ago or so?
Yeah, almost about 2 years ago.
Tell us about the genesis and about the impact.
Well, again, it's just sort of, I fell into it because I realized that no one was talking about these issues, and I wanted to talk about them, I wanted to write about them, and I wanted to bring other people into the conversation. So I started this little group with a couple of friends, and we held our first meeting in, I think it was March of 2014, and thought, maybe 10 or 20 people will show up, and we had over 100 people. And that was meeting. That was when fortunately I had a PowerPoint, and I was like super over-prepared, because that's the way I am. I always over-prepare. So it was good, and I think a lot of people were impressed, and then, the momentum just started gathering, and now we have this big, very active listserv, and people really are now interested in these issues. And I'm not an urban planner. I hadn't studied any of these issues before, and now all of a sudden this is what I think about all the time. And that's one of the reasons I'm in this race, because I found, even though I had a full-time job doing something entirely different, I kept coming back to these are the things I want to be thinking about. These are the problems I want to be solving. So
and we have urban planners running for council. Mariko and Dennis Carlone are both urban planners who have done a lot of both civic engagement and actual architectural planning. But you don't have to be an urban planner. Neither of us are. We engage the community.
No, because I have a resident's perspective, and one of the things that people say to me over and over and over again is, if people would just involve us earlier, talk to us about how this neighborhood really works, what we really need, what we can live with, what the trade-offs are, so that we're not presented with a plan when it's, in its final stages, and we can only, sort of erase around one little edge and spend, hours and hours at hearings writing comments. That's so unproductive.
And from my perspective, real estate developers often feel like they'll get through the process. We know how to get through. We know it can only be held up for so long by so many voices. And so as long as we play nice and put on a smile, we'll get through it. And if they have that attitude where they can definitely get through it without actually engaging the neighborhood, if there's not a majority of councilors holding them to that timeline of early engagement, it's going to be a real problem. And we haven't seen that from the council.
But some to their credit, some of the developers are now starting to understand that it really helps to come to the community sooner. So we've had some conversations like that, and it's been, we've talked about creating a new paradigm. So,
Who are the greats?
Who are the greats?
Who have you been working with early?
I can't name names. Very early stages, but
Mm-hmm.
these are conversations that are happening about how to instead of like triangulating and have it be a giant game of telephone where the developer says one thing and then they get another thing from the city and then the city informs us too late. How do we all actually sit in the room and say, here's what would be mutually beneficial?
And I saw that in the
one of my former professors, I actually just had a conversation with him about this last week. His name is Caesar McDowell, and apart from being a professor at MIT, he runs his own institute. And one of the things he's working on is really, it's all about So right now, the traditional planning process is the city cultivates a plan. They bring in public participation. They bring in the public to respond to the plan, and then it's a kind of back and forth. And then in an ideal scenario, the plan gets implemented. But he's been saying, why don't we have the community devise the questions, devise the plan, devise the vision? And this is exactly what you're talking about. Rather than having the community respond to a proposal, it's what if the community actually identified what needed to happen in the first place?
And that sounds outlandish to people who are very much in favor of the development. How can you give the community the plan? But frankly, that's how it happens in communities that have the most planning. When there is zoning, what you said is functionally the equivalent of good zoning.
Yeah,
when developers
ideally
know what the zoning parameters that the city wants and that the people want are, then they know how to engage, they know what to build, and they actually expend fewer resources. So that what you described is better for developers when a community can come together, not for every single development, but usually for sections, squares, and regions of development, so that the developers can benefit from that knowledge as well.
Yeah.
So, well, maybe UTL will be able to get us all in a room.
Tell us about UTL.
UTL. UTL is the great Boston firm that's been hired to be the consultant for our citywide master planning process, which I hope the council will vote to fund at its next opportunity. There was a slight setback to the funding, but we're hoping that was just a momentary glitch. Yeah. But yeah, tomorrow afternoon, 5:30, right, in the Sullivan Chamber, there will be a round table.
In place of the city council meeting, we're actually going to be engaging in what's called a round table, which is a 2-hour non-televised discussion on urban planning. In this case, it's on urban planning. Round tables can be on anything. And we'll actually be talking about what to expect out of this master planning process, the costs, the benefits, the whole shebang. And UTL is not only, I think, the agency of record, the prime, as they say, for this consulting master plan over the next 3 years here. And not only do they have subsidiaries who they will work with to make this the best master plan possible, but they're also Boston's choice for a similar effort, which I think goes to show how great they are at presenting, but also at how flat out they will be regionally.
Stakeholder engagement was a huge part of what sold, I think, the city, and it certainly sold the audience. I mean, they were the third of the 3 teams to present, and it really looked like a case of saving the best for the last because they were. Yeah. I mean, Tim Love, who leads UTL, is enormously charismatic, and he really wowed us. So I'm hoping that
that bears out.
that bears out.
And in Boston, and hopefully there's some kind of good cross-pollination, right? If they're doing it in Boston, they're doing it here. Maybe there's lessons and opportunities to
there
join.
There ought to be. I mean, it's so crazy that we're all trying to reinvent. We're all grappling with the same issues. Boston has the same housing crisis. It has, we share the MBTA, for heaven's sakes.
And the Charles.
And the Charles. I forgot about that.
I mean, housing and development is a fluid market. When you're a buyer or an owner or a developer, you're not looking at political boundaries necessarily. You're looking at what's convenient for me and my, my life, work, home, play, and we absolutely need a regional perspective and a regional plan.
We share problems with snow removal, opioid addiction. We share recently spun up open data initiatives. Theirs a little bit longer standing than ours. They have an innovation initiative that we don't really have an equivalent of that would be good. So there's a lot.
We share a rat problem.
We share a rat problem.
We share major institutions. I mean, Harvard has a significant presence in Boston.
And MIT, frankly. I mean, MIT's got its tendrils all over the region and the world. So.
Well, Nadeem, tell us about your civic work.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No, that's no problem. This is collaboration.
You're doing such a great job driving here. We're just in awe.
Oh, no, thanks. So in my civic work, I actually think it's really important not just to point at problems, but to have a timeline for solving them. So I think policymakers are traditionally really good at saying, like, I can't believe this problem with opioid addiction. Like, well, guess what? None of us can imagine that or come to terms with that either. What are we going to do about it? And I think policymakers, especially in this city, are able to say, well, that's the administration's problem. How you deal with it is their problem. And frankly, policymakers are required to convene experts, to hold policy milestones and timelines up for the public to see, and to say how we're doing, to say how the city's doing, to say how we're doing as policymakers. I don't think much of that happens.
It's impossible to track.
It's impossible for the average citizen to track, and it's frankly very difficult for me to track as a counselor, and I have some inside info. So what I would say for me is the following. We have to have some kind of project management where the mayor says, hey, all you are heading these committees, hey, you residents, these are what the committees are and what they mean. So here's where you plug in if you want to be involved. Here's the list of meetings that each committee chair has promised to have and on what topics in advance, not just in election season, for the whole term. And here's how we can make consistent progress towards this end. And what's the end? It's the council goals that we all share and we all agree on. This council term, council goals weren't agreed on, and I emailed the chair of that committee repeatedly to say, why haven't we agreed? What are we doing? I thought I was doing my part for project management, but it has to be an agreement for the whole council and for the council with the administration to forward these issues, track them, and then report back in a transparent way.
I mean, I think your point about creating some sort of dashboard or some sort of online mechanism, like publishing a to-do list, that would be amazing.
The basics aren't necessarily happening. Everyone's trying their best, but who knows what the impact is on a policy level. So back to my civics, I guess. My point is that we need to be doing this, and then the real fuel for the fire of good planning and good, positive, progressive, and collaborative change. The fuel is people. That sounds bad. I should say that the fuel is people participating. We're not actually going to use any humans as fuel.
I was worried.
And the way that we do that is that we reach out to families and neighborhoods where they are. That means if we are going to have a senior agenda this council term, I wrote out to some seniors and I said, listen, I've actually been very hesitant to reach out and say I want your vote if I don't have a plan for aging in place and for senior issues. If we're gonna have a plan, we're gonna have to meet around the city at people's convenience repeatedly. And we're gonna have to have a plan for the city in a non-biased, non-political way, canvassing families repeatedly. Every family needs to reach out or get outreach from the city and engage. So if we're going to do that, it's going to improve economic equity, it's going to improve educational equity and the participation of the lowest socioeconomic status families. And if we're going to do that, it's going to improve generic neighborhood engagement in issues affecting that neighborhood. And lastly, I'll end by saying, in your very kind question, that I got some pushback on council when I said we need to televise things, we need to have a communications department that's out there reaching people online, offline, any line that they can. And one of the counselors basically said, I haven't heard any complaints and any problems. And that to me was shocking, because people are always complaining that I show up at a city council meeting and it's incomprehensible. This is Robert's rules and you may need that for order and procedure, but I need the exegesis. I need the explanation in layman's English so I can understand what's going on either there or at home or wherever. And that doesn't exist. And that doesn't exist for the various charrettes and other types of opportunities. They exist without context for most people. And I just think that if we do those three things I discussed, we actually reach out, and most importantly, if we actually do basic PR and explanation, that people will mirror that and they want to be involved.
I hope so. I mean, we have to meet them where we are. You're absolutely right. And help with childcare and different times of day. I mean, the 5:30 council meetings, it's a tough time of day for a lot of people to show up, and public comment is right at the beginning.
And you have to call in advance.
There's that.
You have to call from, what is it, 9:30 to
9.
3.
You can sign up.
You can sign up.
You can sign up when you get there, but then you tend to be at the end of the
And
list.
this should be automated. This is for good reason, because it's done somewhat manually and we don't want to burden the city administrators. But there's a lot of things that should be automated for the benefit of city administrators and the benefit of people wanting to be involved. And that's true for businesses too, who are pulling their hair out. I have a small business here, and I'm talking to small businesses all the time who say we need an OMS person. I'm a small business, not a big steamroller. I need someone who can help me get my permit, because I don't have the silver bullet lawyer who's going to do it for me.
Right. But this is all about making city services more accessible to people. And, we absolutely need our brick and mortar city hall, and we absolutely need our planning processes and our public meetings in person. But I think we're in the 21st century. We should also have a complementary version online as well. It's exactly what you're saying. Why do you have to, if you can't show up to a public meeting at 5:30 after work, if you're an hourly wage worker, if you have a family at home and you want to eat dinner with them, you should still be able to comment on issues that are happening in your city and decisions being made on your behalf.
Let me say, we've reached the end of our half hour, and so just a final
no.
thought. It went so fast, short and sweet,
let's talk about how to vote.
I think we did great. Okay, talk about how to vote really quickly.
Yeah. So right now, I think we just need to emphasize that the election was determined by 8 votes last year, so it's incredibly important that you go out to vote on November 3rd. We have a proportional representation system, so that means you can vote for multiple candidates on the ballot. Want to talk a little bit about that?
You have to rank your candidates, which seems daunting. Really, only one of your votes counts. So even though you've gone to the trouble of researching a whole bunch of candidates and ranking them, and it's important that you do that, because you really don't know exactly which of your votes is going to count.
But vote for the people you want, and don't vote for any people you don't want. Certainly don't vote any extra people based on name recognition, because your vote may land there.
Yes,
yes,
you're absolutely right.
Yes.
And the polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m.
on Tuesday.
If you don't know
November 3rd,
November
a week from
3rd,
this Tuesday.
yes. If you don't know where your polling location is, you can go to the Election Commission's website, which is on the city's website, and they will, you can link and find based on your address. And are we out of time?
We're not quite out of time. We're getting a signal here, but I got another signal from the control booth about